Francis of Assisi is a well-known figure among Christians today. He's renowned for his voluntary poverty, for his solidarity with people on the margins, for his deep appreciation of the kinship that humans have with other creatures, for his peacemaking efforts, and for his humility. Today, I'm going to talk about Clare of Assisi, a contemporary of Francis who is less well known. Clare was born into a noble family in the late 12th century. Against their wishes, as a very young woman, she renounced her wealth. Under the influence and guidance of Francis, she entered into the convent at San Damiano near Assisi, Italy, to lead a life of contemplation and manual labour. There, she founded the Order of the Poor Ladies, now known as the Order of St. Clare or the Poor Clares. Clare is remembered today for many things. She's remembered for her love of animals and nature. It's said that she had such a rapport with her cat that it used to bring her things when she was ill in bed. She's remembered for her austerity. Her order practiced absolute poverty. They didn't own anything, not even common property. They were solely reliant on what could be begged for them by the Franciscan friars. They dressed like peasants. They ate no meat. They fasted regularly, perhaps even to the extreme. Up until her death, Clare defended the right of her order to absolute poverty from repeated attempts to water it down by the papal authorities. Clare is also remembered for her miracles, both large and small. For example, she's twice credited with saving Assisi from military attack. She's remembered for her influence. Although she lived in poverty, she was a noble woman. Other noble women followed her into the convent. Clare was a dear friend to Francis of Assisi, and she was sought out for advice even by the Pope. One large part of Clare's story, which speaks to me today in the context of consumerism, very high levels of consumption, very high levels of material wealth and material goods, is Clare's choice for absolute poverty. Many of us living in Australia today, including me, have a level of financial security and wealth about which previous generations and people the world over could only have dreamed. Economic developments brought us to improved living standards, better quality healthcare, longer life expectancy, education, opportunities for travel and more. But of course, economic development's not equally shared, neither within or between nations. Economic developments also brought tremendous environmental degradation. The sheer throughput of material resources and waste associated with consumer society is colossal. Deforestation, peak oil, over-exploitation of the Earth's resources, massive species extinction, and climate change on a global scale are some of the legacies of consumerism. But the mainstream economic and political view is that we can solve the problems of consumerism while still pursuing economic growth. The aim here is to dematerialise the economy while still growing it, to enhance financial wealth while at the same time decreasing material throughput. But there's no precedent to think that this level of dematerialisation is feasible. The rate of resource productivity gain that would be required year on year seems very difficult indeed to attain. Those economists who suggest that the wealthy countries should put in place policies to move away from continued ad infinitum economic growth towards a steady state economy hold a marginal position in the debate. When much of the rich world is in economic stagnation or recession, with all the unemployment and worsening inequality that's been accompanying that, it's yet another reason to strive for structural change. A system that's seemingly stable only when it grows is not a sustainable system, not in the face of ecological limits, not in the face of gross inequality in access to wealth and material goods. It can be tempting for rich Christians, including me, to overly spiritualize the many gospel teachings and stories that bring woe to the rich and good news to the poor. To simply say that money is not the problem, it's the idolization of money. We can be wealthy as long as we hold it lightly, are generous to the poor, and don't allow ourselves to be possessed by our wealth. Wealth is okay as long as we are willing to give it up, if God calls us to that. We should be content with what we have and not hanker after riches. We should place our hopes in the eternal God, not in the fleetingness and uncertainty of material goods. Guarding against idolatry then becomes the solution to wealth. Perhaps in a society where the accumulation of material wealth is so deeply entrenched, a spirituality of holding material goods lightly is enough of a challenge for us. But Francis and Clare challenge us further because they did make these lifestyle changes. Choosing to be downwardly mobile and join the peasant class was not a normal thing to do in their society. The Franciscan order was one of the very first to practice absolute poverty. But their poverty was not self-denial for no reward, or a denial of the importance of the material world for that matter. It was about a different way of living in the material world that drew them closer to God. They sought to imitate Jesus Christ in the way that they lived, and in so doing, to commune with Him. And in communing with Him, in turn, to conform their lives ever more closely to His. Like Paul in today's epistle, Francis and Clare and their companions sought to know Christ and the power of His resurrection and the sharing of His sufferings by becoming like Him in His death, and for His sake to suffer the loss of all things. In a letter to a friend, Clare described Jesus Christ as the mirror that is the source of her contemplation. "Behold, I say, the birth of this mirror," she writes. "Behold His poverty, even as He was laid in the manger and wrapped in swaddling clothes. What marvelous humility, what wondrous poverty. The King of angels, the Lord of heaven and earth, resting in a manger. Look more deeply into the mirror and meditate on His humility, or simply on His poverty. Behold the many labors and suffering He endured to redeem the human race." In much more feminine terms than Paul, she says, "Queen and bride of Jesus Christ, look into that mirror daily and study well your reflection, that you may adorn yourself, mind and body, with an enveloping garment of every virtue, and thus find yourself attired in flowers and gowns befitting the daughter and most chaste bride of the King on high." Many centuries on, the story of Clare has passed into the realm of legend. We can be in danger of distancing ourselves from her, either on the one hand by viewing her as a hero who achieves superhuman feats, or on the other hand by romanticizing her life, making light of her struggles, her illness and her frailty. Either way, we deny her humanity and her story loses its capacity to motivate us. And if we distance ourselves from Clare, perhaps we're also in danger of distancing ourselves from the humanity of Jesus Christ that she so affirmed, His poverty which she was so committed to emulate. The life of Clare compels us to seriously consider that the abundant life that is the promise for all creation may well require substantial human sacrifice on the part of the wealthy, and that in sacrifice, abundant life can be found. My prayer is that we might be willing to be so confronted and prayerfully and humbly consider together how we might make our response.